Today, as you know, is Full Economic Day. It's been left to the very, very last moment. It should really come out in like October or maybe November. But the very, very last moment, Chrystia Freeland's going to release the full economic statement. And we're going to see how much Canada is in the hole. But you can guarantee she's going to say a few things that have nothing to do with everyday lives of Canadians. Let's listen to a little bit of an interview that went on, and let's diagnose a couple of things that she said. Just the numbers that they want to show look pretty bad. From 40 billion. 40 billion is the threshold that she's got to go up to, and not go over that, because as you can see, the deficit is scheduled to come down and down and down until 28. Obviously, they're factoring in that Pierre Poilievre's going to take over in 25, so that's maybe why they've factored in that it's going to actually come down. But let's have a listen.
She only committed to meeting one of those so-called anchors, and it wasn't the deficit.
Our fiscal anchor is the debt to GDP ratio and a declining debt to GDP ratio. I expect that when I table the numbers on Monday, I will show that the debt to GDP ratio, which we forecast in the 2024 budget for the 23-24 fiscal year, will be met.
Will you also be able to keep the deficit below 40.1 billion?
Okay, let's have a look at where Canada stands in this debt to GDP ratio. She's always saying this and always bringing up the G7. Caution required when comparing Canada's debt to other countries. This is from the Canadian News, the Fraser Institute. Canada's debt ranking falls best in G7 to 7th worst. Now, I first read this and I thought, when you first look at it, it says 7th worst, all right? It's like they're trying to put over the fact that we're 7th out of 32. I know it says 7th worst, but can you see the way that it's written? It's written to show that we're the 7th worst, not the 26th or 27th out of 32. No, we're the 7th worst. Yeah, I'd rather them just say, but we're in the last quarter. We're one of the worst countries when total debt is measured. But here, look, Canada's relative debt position is much worse than the federal government suggests when a large group of advanced countries are included in the total debt. Not just the net debt is measured, finds a new study released today, independent partisan Canadian public policy think tank. The federal government is very quick to point out that the country's net debt relative to the size of the economy, GDP, is lowest in the G7. Well, Canada's true debt position is much worse. So they're only taking in the net debt. They're not taking in the full debt. It's much worse than Ottawa lets on. Now, imagine you get paid and you get your wages and they take the tax off the gross of your wages, yeah? Could you turn around to the taxman and say, hey, take the tax off the net of my wages? I don't have to pay as much then, do I? No, I don't think you get away with that. Let's continue with what else she's got to say. I don't think she's at all coming over very well in any interview, to be honest.
$1 as projected.
Are you saying you're now comfortable going past that?
Does your government still think it's important to shrink the federal deficit?
I offered something very clear information on what I expect when it comes to the debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio is our fiscal anchor.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is accusing the Liberals of crashing through their own fiscal guardrails.
She's like a bus driver saying she's going to come just short of hitting that $40 billion guardrail. And then some crazy lunatic comes in, grabs the steering wheel, and jerks it sharp to the left through the guardrail. Does he realize there's 41 million Canadians that are going to go off the cliff in that bus?
While the Leader of the Opposition continues to talk down Canadians and the Canadian economy, and indeed Canada, let me once again put it on the record. Canada is the best country in the world. And we, as Canadians, are stepping up, got us through the pandemic. Canadians got us through the challenge of high inflation.
All right.
Yeah, Canadians, the Conservative government under Harper got us through the 2008 crash. The Liberal government at the moment just seems to be piling on debt and more debt and more debt. Anyway, I just thought I'd go through that with the GDP ratio just before we get the full economic statement, and you can decide for yourselves whether you think GDP is more important than the deficit, or whether or not it's more important than being able to afford food and actually do things physically as a citizen of Canada. Okay, see you on the next one, guys.